to this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network, and joining us as we head into October, it's his turn. Again, State Representative Chris Hendricks joining us.
Happy
Thanks
to be
for coming
here, Jim.
in.
Thank you.
It's a fall season. I know that we are in informal session right now.
Yes.
The formal session ending, well, I was going to say after. Usually it ends July 1st, but it did end a little after because the budget didn't.
Yeah, about 10 a.m.
Yeah.
So August 1st.
So it is sort of an informal session, but doesn't mean there's not things going on up there. Things are still happening.
Right.
As you review the budget for us from your standpoint, and talk about, and I did this with Representative Cabral last month, just kind of talk about your overall impressions of what passed, some of the things that you were able to secure in that budget, and then we can talk about, because I know there's a lot of stuff that didn't get discussed that I know Rep. Cabral and others really want to see done in the next 3 months. So to start it out, let's review what did pass.
So the fiscal 25 budget did pass, as well as the housing bond bill. So I'll start with those two pieces of legislation. The budget, my earmarks in the budget were stuff that I've gotten in the past. I've got, I think it was $50,000 for the Girls Design Academy, which is an after-school program for science-related activities for 3 and 5th graders. I got $50,000 for the, I think maybe even more than 50, for the America Reads program, which is basically sends college kids into neighborhood schools and teaches and does tutoring for reading, all sorts of lessons. It's a program that was started in the 90s by Bill Clinton. It's a federal program, but the earmark that I secured was for transportation to get those kids from UMass into the schools at New Bedford and in and around New Bedford.
Right.
The housing bond bill, that was a big.
Which was a huge.
That was a huge thing.
And we talked about that the last time you were here.
Yep. And so that got passed. That was one of the omnibus bills that we were able to get finished by the deadline.
Some people weren't happy with it, though. Said it didn't go far enough.
A lot of people,
yeah.
Me being one of them. I think we could have done more as far as tenant protections. But long story short, what the bill does is it will assign about $5.2 billion in bond money to housing development across the Commonwealth. $2 billion, this is I think one of the biggest pieces to this bill, this law, is that $2 billion of that is designed specifically, allocated specifically to the local housing authorities. As you may or may not know, the local housing authorities are doing terribly as far as having apartments fall offline because of disrepair, having limited resources to fix, shingling, roofs. So a lot of the 40-something thousand units that we have statewide have fell offline. And so we have decided to significantly invest in local housing authorities. I think that's a great angle. We're only one of 5 states that have a state, housing authority structure with actual housing units, which I didn't know up until recently. It's a pretty unique thing here in Massachusetts.
But it's a federal thing too, right? The housing authorities are sort of federal,
they get
state,
federal money.
And local. I don't want to say it's a quasi government, but it is. I mean, it has all three that are tied into it.
Yep, it's all tied in. And so, but for years and years, the state has, don't want to say neglected, but didn't have the
funding.
Put the proper funding, proper resources on that. So we will be able to really strengthen up the lowest among us, the state housing authorities. We also had big new tax breaks for developers who want to convert commercial property into residential. This is another huge thing. I think Tony Cabral may have gotten a specific earmark for that, related to that piece. But that's going to make a huge dent in the housing crisis, because just think about all the commercial property that you drive through New Bedford. In some areas, it's just storefronts that are empty. Converting those, incentivizing converting those into housing, I think is going to be a huge deal.
Well, the interesting thing with the housing that I see, and you and I talked about this because I watched the last show just to see what we were touching on and see if there's any updates. Because you at the time, you did represent Acushnet before the changeover here, but you're looking at places where it doesn't matter where you are. It could be in a small town like Acushnet or a city. There's not enough housing, but it seems to me that part of the problem is, there's just not enough. You've got to develop property, and there's not enough. People aren't doing that.
Right.
So how do you? I don't want to say force is not the right word, but how do you incentivize somebody who's got a parcel of land that could be used for housing?
Well, you got to get creative. That's what we did.
And the other thing is towns, and I'm not saying any here, but there are towns that are like, we don't want to grow anymore. We can't support what we have.
Yep.
So I mean, we could throw all the money at it, but it's it's more complicated than just money.
Yep. And New Bedford, by the way, has shared that burden as far as the South Coast has shared that burden compared to all the other towns. We as far as affordability, we have met that above and beyond. We can always do more, but you're exactly right. It's a difficult thing because some communities don't want it. I forgot what was your question.
No, I'm just but it's not just money. That's my thing. It's not just a money issue.
Yeah.
It's how do you incentivize a developer or whoever to develop housing?
Yeah, and I think the tax credits will do that with the commercial, and we also have new historic tax credits as well in this bill. It's going to be a grind. This is just the first step. Like I said, there's a lot of tenant protections. There are a lot of things substantively that we could have done, but the ADUs made it. The accessory dwelling units provision did make it. So statewide, as of the signing of this bill, by right, a property owner will have the ability to build accessory dwelling units for housing. I think that's great, and that's creative, and I think that's awesome, but that's only expected to bring around 8 to 10 units online, and we're about 200,000 behind. So there's a lot of angles that you could attack this issue with, and so hopefully we did a multi-angled approach in this bill, but certainly there's a lot more we could be doing.
And the monies for properties, even when a house comes online, the prices really haven't dropped.
Right.
I mean, other things have dropped, but there's still such a
So
demand.
there's a lot of market-related pressures that could affect this moving into a lot of question marks, a lot of variables. And so, we think getting a good foundation is what we really needed right now. And so hopefully we can build on that, moving forward. Like I said, the tenant protections, the ones I'm really interested in are spreading out the upfront costs. Because the hardest part about going to get an apartment, especially if you're low income, you're a regular working person, it's
first and
last security that can bury you. That's thousands of dollars that people just don't have, and so there's bills, there's legislations up there, and we try to get it in this housing bill that would allow the tenant to spread that out with the first 6 months or maybe even a year of the tenancy, as opposed to it being due up front. So I think there's many ways that we can alleviate the pressure for tenants and actual people, in allowing people to have access to proper representation in housing court. Right? It's not a right that you get. Right now we have a lawyer for a day program where some people will have access to that lawyer, some people don't, and a lot of people get screwed out of their house and out of the system by not having proper representation. So that's a push that we tried to get in as well.
Is there something legislatively? I know one of the issues that comes up is you've got a lot of out-of-town landlords now. Mm-hmm. People are buying the properties, and rents are rents are doubling or tripling in some cases, and people who were in these apartments are getting booted out.
Kicked out. Yep.
Is there anything to be done about that? I mean,
well, there's a rent stabilization piece that is always, rent control, which is always the response to that. I don't see that. I would vote for it in a second. Stabilization. I don't know about the 5% figure that they have about that being the limits about what landlords can raise
it. Okay.
I would, if it were to come to a vote, I would like to see that a little higher. I think 5% is a little restrictive. And so, but yeah, I mean, that's always going to be the challenge and by the way, a lot of those bills that have to do with rent stabilization, if it's owner occupied, they're exempt, which would go to the exact point that you brought up with out of town landlords, people we don't know, people who live in Boston, buying 3 or 4 tenements in New Bedford, racking up the rents, 5-6 years later. That's what we got to watch out for. And so I think those exceptions to have owner occupied, if you're there living there, You're not subject to that restriction.
I've heard from landlords, and I'm generalizing now, that they would rather charge less for a rent as long as they had a good tenant that they knew was paying on time, not having any problems or whatever. They'd take a little less. But the other thing is you got the market pressure that so-and-so is making, twice of what you're doing, and, you're trying to be, it's a double-edged sword for them.
It's tough. And so, it's always a little guy who gets stuck at the end, so this housing bond bill, that's kind of my angle. That's what I wanted to see, as much tenant protections. How many people can we protect who are, the most vulnerable among us with respect to housing?
And your district has so much housing going on right now.
I get 2 MBTA communities in my district. And so that is going to spur, affordable housing, by right, and let people develop multi-unit housing in those areas. So hopefully in the Church Street area, and then down in the, the Plasky Common area, you'll see some, and you're already starting to see it, some development and some changes happening. But by the way, the housing bond bill, we got some money for, and that reminds me of the earmark for $500,000 I got for demolition and construction of a parking deck in that neighborhood, right near the pedestrian bridge. Because the biggest thing in the city, particularly downtown, with offshore wind, the train, housing, is parking. It's an unsexy topic, but it's something that we're really going to need to put our attention on. We're at the stage where we need to figure out the parking.
Well, because neighbors I know have gone to council, different meetings, and I'm sure you've seen them, and when they're worried about when they go to planning and zoning for proposals or whatever, and they're worried about parking. They're like, there's not enough parking now. Where are people going to go?
And one of the highlights of the MBTA Communities Act is that they don't have to consider parking. So in order to create an area of public transportation, folks who, let's create a little hub, let's make sure people have the resources like grocery stores and basic needs in those new neighborhoods and those new developments. So people don't, if you're not going to have parking, you don't need a car. And so that's the idea, is to build out downtown to the point where you can live there without needing a car. We're not there yet. It's going to take some time. But I think that's the goal. I think it's smart to do that.
From your standpoint, too, with all this, there is a lot of stuff going on downtown, and there is a lot of activity in New Bedford. There's no question about it. Is there a concern from you that you do have those, for lack of a better word, out-of-towners that are looking, and I guess the word I'm thinking of is poaching.
Yeah.
They're just, I'm going to make money here, and in a sense, the dynamic in New Bedford's changing a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have multiple constituents who have called me and said, I got a postcard in the mail with a picture of my house, all the details of my house. That is public, but it's still kind of weird to get, in a postcard to your own house. Making an offer, say, I'll buy a house for, $500,000, or so it's a lot of weird advertising going on with respect to that. But yeah, you're exactly right. That's going to happen, and investors, whether they're local or not, are going to see this as an opportunity. And I think as elected officials, it's our job to make sure that's a process that happens in a way that doesn't screw out people out of their homes. Some people might take an offer and say, okay, great, I'll take the $500,000 and move to Florida, which is their right. But we don't necessarily want that. We want local people staying in their homes, maintaining the culture that we have in New Bedford. And it's a great culture, it's a great community. And losing that small neighborhood vibe that New Bedford's always had, no matter where you are in the city, that's concerning that could be affected with. I mean,
you're born and lived in New Bedford your whole life. Mm-hmm. I mean, and it's funny because I've lived here now for 25 years. Great thing about New Bedford, it's a big city, but it's a little city, and everybody knows everybody.
Yep.
And I think that's what's attractive about it.
Mm-hmm. It's very local.
You don't want it to change, but you're worried that it's going to change.
If you're going to grow in a city like New Bedford, these things we're talking about are natural. And I think, like I said, our job is to mitigate all those negative things as much as we can. Gentrification, rents going through the roof, there's a lot of attention on these things, whereas in the past, growths of cities, they didn't really care about the incidental damage. But I think we have a lot of focus on it, and hopefully we're well positioned to mitigate those things.
And last thing on this thing, the good thing for you is you're not the only representative, or we're not the only city that's dealing with this issue either.
Right. Yeah, it's statewide and national.
Boston's one thing, and then the other cities are completely different.
Yeah, in gateway cities, being part of the gateway cities caucus and world, that's you're right. That's everywhere they're dealing with the same thing.
A couple of things, and I know we could go on, but it's been a good topic, and I think a lot of people like to hear about that because they are concerned about their homes. You talked about you're very excited about. You got one of your items passed or signed recently, and you're very excited about that. Talk a little about that.
So I sit on the Federal Stimulus and Census Oversight Committee, which is basically a House committee. It's not a joint committee. It's a House committee that oversees any legislation related to any federal funding, any grant money that is available that we could pursue. Basically, it's a way to make sure Massachusetts is well positioned with respect to federal monies. So a bill came through our committee which would take the stabilization fund, interest from the stabilization fund, which is right now about just over $8 billion, and put that in a separate fund on a yearly basis in order to pursue federal grant money, to better position us to pursue those monies. The CHIPS Act, the Infrastructure Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act, those are the three bills related to the grant funding that we could pursue through this bill. So I think it's smart. People are always saying that we should run government like a business, which I disagree and agree with in certain aspects, but this is an area where it's smart. I think it's interest money, and it comes with some parameters. Not every year we don't transfer interest from the stabilization fund to this new fund. It has to be, certain parameters have to be met as far as revenues. I think we have to have in the stabilization fund, there has to be at least 10% of prior budgeted revenues. So it's not going to happen every year. So it's smartly written that this will only happen when the money is there. And I think there's so much federal money. We're looking at $17 billion that we could be pursuing in the next several years because of the federal actions. So I think this is a good bill, and it's nice to have a bill come through my committee and get passed and signed. And I chaired the hearing, about half the hearing. Chair Lewis was gracious enough to let me handle the meeting and ask questions. So it was a very good process. Again, it's smart. A&F is going to be the entity that will be in charge of transferring that money and making sure that all the parameters are met before any money is transferred. So I'm happy that made it over the finish line as of a couple weeks ago.
Right, yeah, the governor, I know, signed it. She had a bill signing ceremony. One of the things that we talked about off camera before we came in here is you are in informal session, but the economic development plan that wasn't passed during the formal session, everybody wants this, it seems. We're here in October, early October. What are your thoughts? I mean, you talked about it out there.
The economic development bill that didn't pass is the biggest thing that's being talked about as far as all the outstanding stuff that we didn't get finished. From what I'm hearing in the conversations I've had with House leadership and the delegation and others is that we're going to get called. They're close. They're working on it.
It's in conference committee, if I'm not mistaken.
Committee. Yeah. So there's some differences with the House and Senate version, but we're confident that at some point we'll get called in. Hopefully this month. We can get called in between now and the end of December. So. I'm confident we have some time left.
It would have to be a formal session too, right?
Not necessarily.
No.
I think for something like this, they would call us in to do it, I think, just as a matter of course. But I think technically they could get it done in informal, just like they could to get anything done, with the exception of having someone object to it.
Right.
So that's the problem. So they would definitely call us in for a formal session if they worked out an agreement on that.
You were talking last time, and I know Rep. Cabral, when he came in too, I mean, people say, okay, it's an economic development bill, but there is some, I guess, benefits in this bill for New Bedford.
Oh God, yeah.
That it is important to get something like this
Yep.
through. I know Senator Montigny was saying that. This is an important bill.
We worked, actually, I'm glad you mentioned Senator Montigny. You know, the House delegation and Senator Montigny worked hand in hand, which was actually a very great experience, you know, working together and getting something done on the Pope's Island Marina, which is in the economic development bill. We got it passed in the House. Senator Montigny got it passed in the Senate. A little bit of a different language, but it's non-conferenceable as far as how we see it. So what that amendment does with respect to the Pope's Island Marina is it basically codifies the arrangements that we have now. It's a state-owned marina. I'm talking about the wooden structure actually that's floating in the water that the city manages and runs and profits from, and charges folks $200 a foot, which is cheap compared to other areas.
Yeah.
Which is the whole point of this marina. And so, but for years and about 20 years, the city was operating kind of loosely with some lease that you could argue wasn't even a legal lease. So we codified that into law. Basically, it's an arrangement where they will be paying money to the state as far as like a rent almost. But that money, half of that money will be going in to an account that they will have access to. I'm talking about the city. And it's for capital projects. Because one of the main issues with this marina is that it kind of fell into disrepair. With the city in control of it, and I know it's tough to find money to fix a marina when you have people on the street and everything.
Money's the biggest issue right now everywhere.
So we understand how that happened, and so this legislation is designed to prevent that, to have a capital fund that they can build up along the way and have capital improvements done.
I just think that too, when people are at home and they hear economic development plan, it's like, oh, it's this big pie in the sky thing. But there is things that directly impact them.
And that was an amendment. That wasn't even have to do with bond money. That was just language. We also have all our earmarks in this bond bill. I got $1.5 million for the Greater New Bedford Health Center in downtown to do their expansions and everything. So we have a lot of money. And Tony and Mark and everyone else, they all have huge earmarks in that bill as well. So we're really anxious on many levels for many reasons to get that economic development bill done by the end of the year. I think we will, but it's going to be a little bit of time.
So I was asked to ask you.
But it depends by whom.
But my wife, actually. So with the Route 18, because it's a state project, the off-ramp is being changed. What's
the off-ramp?
Isn't it the...
By Glazer Glass?
Yeah, no, not the Glazer Glass. Underneath the Hayden McFadden School, aren't they doing stuff the highway?
On 195, yes. That is going to be a huge... They're going to redo that whole junction. That's going to be a big project.
It's a state thing, though.
It's a state project.
Yeah.
Yep. And so
it seems to be quiet, though. I guess you don't really have
right now. It is. It's all planned out as far as I remember. It's ready to go. Construction has not started on it, but that's expected to start, I think, next year, or within the next couple of years.
That's right in the heart of.
That's right in the heart of everything.
Of your district.
And I compliment the mayor and the city for making sure that that design was kind of 1984, kind of plain. With no green space, and I think the city kind of was involved in making sure that they put some green space in there, so I commend them for doing that. That's going to be a big project. They're going to reroute that whole junction, the lanes and everything. It's going to be a little safer, a little wider, more lighting, all that. But that's also going to be potentially in line with the bridge, the construction of the bridge.
Okay.
So I don't know how they're going to work off one another, if they're going to do it at the same time. Or even work in coordination at all about timing. I hope they do, because that could be a real headache over the next couple of years. They have the bridge.
I was thinking of you because I was telling my wife, I'm like, that's his district. I mean, that's right in the heart of your district right now.
Yep, that's and that's on its way, and hopefully it's going to, obviously the idea is to make things more efficient on the highway, getting on and off to New Bedford. So it's going to, New Bedford will benefit greatly from that. And once just imagine you have offshore wind, you have the train, you have the pedestrian bridge, you have the 18 project, or the 195 project, 18 junction,
yeah.
and then you have the bridge. It's going to be a lot going on the next couple of years.
And you were talking, I mean, the train right now, as you said, they've had the test runs.
They've had, the first 2 phases of the safety testing is complete. The last phase, the 3rd phase, is still, that's going to take a few more months. I don't know if you saw the news, but we had a ride with legislators and electeds from Middleborough to New Bedford on the train. It was remarkable, honestly, to come on the train from Middleborough, from north of the city, and ride into New Bedford on a train with just a different perspective. You see different views.
Yeah.
It was something else. It was really, really cool. So we're really excited about that.
But the talk too is Taunton's not done yet.
The station Taunton's not done.
And that's been a huge. That's been slower than expected.
It has, but that doesn't expect that's going to hold anything up, because the safety's going to be, by the time the safety's done, that should be done as well. And Taunton has a center platform, which is a little tricky design-wise than just having one-sided platforms. So that's why it's a little more involved in Taunton. And it's more of it's a hub, because that's right after that is where it breaks off into New Bedford and Fall River. So that will be the first hub that the South Coast will.
Because New Bedford's aspects seem to be, if not done, just
pretty much done.
I was going to say 95% done.
Yep. I think all the infrastructure, all the track, all the bridges, all the stations, it's pretty much done down here. And it's just safety. When we took that train ride into the city, we did it at full speed. And coming in at 80 miles per hour, obviously, north of the city is when we're going fast, but coming in like that and on a train that's brand new, and it's after years and years of work, it's something else. So, and it's going to be an investment over time. It's not, ridership isn't going to be where it's going to be on day one. It's going to be something we're going to have to work on and invest in and make sure people, I think CERTA having the bus free of charge is going to be a huge deal. CERTA is going to reroute their buses depending on the train schedule. So transportation is going to look a lot different in New Bedford over the next few years.
I know it's a 2-hour, they're talking 2-hour train ride, but I still think you're sitting in traffic for 2 hours most days anyway if you're driving up.
Yeah.
It's just a lot less
Doing
stressful
nothing.
for you.
Yep.
So.
And if you do, and it's going to alleviate the traffic on the road too. So that's the idea. Hopefully it's going to alleviate a lot of pressure all along the South Coast.
Right. That's going to do it. That's flown. That half hour flew.
Yeah.
So
it always does with you.
I thank you for coming in, and good stuff. We'll talk to you. Well, we won't see you again until the new year.
Yeah. So,
but
have a good holiday.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Chris Hendricks, our guest. That's going to do it for the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall, the New Bedford Cable Network. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.
If you need to do something to feel okay to drive, you're not okay to drive. Don't drive buzzed.